Hello, everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, home of Mastering MuseScore. Welcome to the MuseScore Café. So, this is my regular series. We talk about some aspect of using MuseScore, making music using MuseScore, and this week's theme is a little different. We're not going to be necessarily getting into the nuts and bolts of using MuseScore itself. We'll do that next week. It'll be the Ask Me Anything session. But instead, this is going to be a kind of a brainstorming session. I'm going to share some ideas about what are they about? About creating what I'm calling a high quality score library. And we'll talk about what I mean by this, but I'm wanting people to be active in the chat for this. So by all means, let me know who's here. And I've got a slide that I put together so I would have some talking points so that we would know what we're going to talk about. And so let me flip over and show you that slide, and we'll kind of go from there. So let me, where is my slide? Here we go. Here's my slide. And I don't want to do the whole slideshow thing because I don't want to go all full screen on it. Oh, actually, I will. I'm going to go slideshow on this thing and then just pop out my chat and float it so I can see chat while looking at slideshow. Let me know if I'm having any difficulties here. So these are the things that I'm going to be talking about. And it's kind of a long list of things, but most of them are just like take me 30 seconds to tell you what I'm talking about. So let me first give you kind of a big picture of what we're dealing with here. I'm going to give you a real world example. I mentioned this during office hours yesterday, so some of you heard this story already. But just the other day, I was posting, I was creating a video, a demonstration for the Counterpoint course in which I wanted to do some analysis of a Bach invention. I already forgot which one it was. The C major invention, I think. And so I was going through a score I found on MuseScore.com that looked good. And as I'm going through it, I found two typos while I'm recording this demo. I'm like, this has got to be a typo, not because I know the piece so well, but because I know Counterpoint and I know the principles that were being followed. And it was quite obvious that there was one note, actually two notes in the piece that weren't correct. And this got me thinking, and I've been thinking along these lines for a long time. Man, it would have been great if I had known up front which of the many versions of this invention were the best. Which were the ones that others had judged to be high quality in some way. Often I'm able to tell by who uploaded it. There's certain users that I've come to trust when I see their name attached to a score. I'm like, oh, this is probably pretty accurate. Partially it's about accuracy. Partially it's about good use of MuseScore, like doing things correctly, not misusing symbols to mean things other than they're supposed to mean, not adding a symbol to one note and then dragging it over another when it really belongs to that note. There's all sorts of things that we can talk about eventually that make something a high quality score, not in terms of its accuracy, but in terms of how well it uses MuseScore. And those are both very important for the blind community of users who take these MuseScore files and either learn pieces from them or they want to run them through a Braille translator, and they want to know that it's accurate both note-wise and in the use of MuseScore, because if you have a staccato marking that was attached to one note and then dragged over another, it's going to look right on the screen. But when you export to Music XML, it's going to be attached to the wrong note, and the Braille translation will have it attached to the wrong note. So it's especially important that it not just look correct on screen, but it's actually done correctly. So we want accuracy, we want readability. We want things to look good, and we want that correctness of use of MuseScore. These are all things that we want to have happen. And so this is going to be really useful anytime you want to look up a score. Like in the counterpoint course, I was looking up that Bach invention, but there's any number of times when you might want to be finding some score for either to learn it, to play it yourself, or to analyze it, to use it as a source for your own arrangement or whatever, right? So that is the basic problem we're trying to solve. Now, the scope of this is that I'm mostly talking about classical music here. And Dave, do I need a rating system? Maybe. So we're going to talk about how the system might work. And this is where, we're going to open this up for discussion as I kind of set things up. I'm going to put some questions out there. And you're right, it might be a separate website with a wiki or something like that. Maybe there's some way to get the Outside Shore community on Circle. Maybe there's some way I can finagle, the way the different spaces are set up. Maybe I can get something to work the way I want. I doubt it. It's possible it could all be done as a spreadsheet. That doesn't make me happy. That feels way too dry and not fun. But yeah, we'll talk about the actual mechanisms in a minute. So when we talk about the scope of this, I definitely am focused mostly on classical music for two reasons. One is then you can actually talk about the accuracy, right? I mean, the composer wrote some particular things. If we're talking about a pop song, then there's lots of different transcriptions. And is it a piano arrangement of that pop song, or is it, someone trying to transcribe all the parts from the original recording? Chances are there's stuff in it that wasn't ever notated, that was, just sort of improvised, or even that were sounds, not musical sounds, but, seagulls or whatever. So anyhow, so I'm mostly focused on classical music, but also for copyright reasons, we're going to mostly be focused on stuff that's public domain or for which permission exists. Now, this is an issue because also those of you in the UK or any part of the UK greater Commonwealth, whatever, you're probably familiar with something called, and you all can correct me on this, the Royal Schools something. Man, I wish I could remember, but you all know what I'm talking about, right? It's an education system with very specific grading. Like this piece is grade 4 according to the RBSM or RSMB or whatever the thing is, right? And it's not just in the UK, but the UK is really the one place where that is like, there is like a whole thing around that. The United States doesn't really have anything like that. So we often refer to the UK version, and I wish I could remember what it's called. Someone please fill me in. Royal Schools of Music, Royal Board, fill me in the chat. Associated Board, Royal Scores of Music, Royal School of Music, maybe that's it. ABRSM. Anyhow, they have all this music that they use in their exams and their training materials and so forth. And a lot of it's classical music that's, public domain, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of the music that they want people to learn for these different grading exams and stuff is still under copyright. And it is not something that MuseScore.com currently has licenses for, which is a drag. So MuseScore.com has licenses for a lot of pop music, a lot of stuff that's under copyright, so that it can be posted to MuseScore.com legally, and royalties get passed along to the composers, publishers, etc. But the stuff for the ABRSM, I think I'm saying that right. ABRSM, yes, thank you, Dave. Those pieces are not necessarily available on MuseScore.com, or they can't necessarily be made available legally. But that's a problem we would like to solve. So in my problems to solve thing, when it talks about permissions, that's one of them. That is definitely something that we know people want access to that music, but right now the only way to get it is through purchasing from ABRSM, and they don't have Braille editions. So it's a drag. All right, so let's talk about what actually exists. And yeah, thanks for that link. See, I'm familiar with the idea of the thing. I just never remember the name of it. What exists right now? There's a number of things that exist right now. And I keep referring to MuseScore.com, and I assume since this is the MuseScore Café, people are basically familiar with it. We're going to take a look at that in a second. But I want to start off with something that's sort of older, and that is the IMSLP. So let me get to where I have, of course, I can't remember where I put all my tabs that I had open. So give me a moment. Must be here. So IMSLP is a website that has been around for quite some time, not sure how long, but it's a resource that I use all the time, I talk about, so I know a lot of you are familiar with it. It's a place where it's mostly PDFs of public domain, as it says in boldface there, public domain music, virtually all of it classical. Because if it's public domain, that basically means it's more than 100 years old. So it's basically like 100 years. It means music over 100 years ago. So we're not talking about pop songs. It might be like, pop songs of the late 19th century, Stephen Foster or whatever. I mean, some of that sheet music is available on this site, but it's all public domain music. And these are great resources here. You could look up, like if I look up Bach invention in C, it's going to search. It just does a Google search of that site, and it's going to show both versions of just that piece, but also the entire collection that it was taken from. As a collection of 15 inventions in different keys. So you'll see here at the top here is performances, then there's sheet music, and the sheet music is almost all PDFs. PDF, PDF scan, PDF scan, PDF scan. These are all PDFs, PDF typeset by editor. So here's one that was created, not published by, like, these are all from actual publishers, Behrenreiter and Breitkopf, right? All these different publishers. So these are actual published editions from over 100 years ago. That's the thing, is not only does the piece have to have been written over 100 years ago, but the edition has to be more than 100 years old. And I'm not saying 100 is the absolute cutoff. Copyright law is more complex than that. But roughly speaking, anything more than about 100 years ago is probably public domain. So, yeah, you'll find all these different scans of actual published editions, and they vary in quality. I like this version here. Oh, this looks terrible, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to have to read from this. It's a low quality scan. Is that really the whole thing, or is that just I might actually be looking at the wrong thing. Let me try this. Some of the editions are more recent. Yeah, so this is from a handwritten score here, right? But it was published that way, right? So it takes a while to find even the best version on IMSLP, but at least it is there, and these are all actual published editions. If they say so, they'll give you the information about the publisher. So they're quite good as far as that goes. There are some scores where you will see music XML files made available, and recently MuseScore files. So for some scores, you will find actual MuseScore files available, or Braille files even. So it's possible that instead of using MuseScore.com for what we're talking about, we may be using IMSLP. But the advantage of MuseScore.com, of course, is if someone posts something to it, like, okay, well, this is on my site. I'm going to come to that in a second. If I look at one of these inventions, here's the one in E major, and this is one of the people, Marc Sabatella, whose work I generally think is good. He does good transcriptions. So not only do we see this now, but we can play it, right? Right. So it's it's really useful, not just because it's a place to put things, but it's a place that has this built-in playback feature. And it's built-in playback, and then you can just click edit on desktop, and it's going to go ahead and pop it up into MuseScore, or you can download it. If I click the download button here, I got to X this out, I guess. You'll see you can download it in Music XML format and then use that to feed into a Braille converter. So it's obviously a very useful site, and all the public domain music on it is free. You don't need a paid account. You don't need a pro account to download public domain music. So here's that score now loaded into MuseScore, right? And now I can play it directly. And I can do things like say, this is a little quirky decision he made. I don't know why he put the natural sign on that tie. That's not necessarily ideal to have the natural sign on the tie, after the bar line. So that should be removed. So I say he generally does good work, but every once in a while there might be something like that I'm like, no, that's not really correct. And yes, there's some MIDI files and audio files on there, but mostly you'll find PDFs and hopefully over time more MuseScore files as well. But even if there's MuseScore files, it won't be as cool as MuseScore.com, because MuseScore.com just gives you, the ability to play and the ability to just hit that edit on desktop button, which is quite cool. So MuseScore, of course, is what we're dealing with here. And this is, the notation software we can use. Anyone can use, right? It's free for everyone to download MuseScore and then use it to create these scores. So obviously, while it would be possible for someone to build a library of scores in Sibelius format or Finale format or Dorico format, not everyone has access to those programs because they're expensive. And so that's not really on the table. Music XML is a format. If you have Sibelius and you create a score in Sibelius format, you can export to Music XML, and then Music XML you could upload to IMSLP, and MuseScore will open it, Sibelius will open it, Finale will open it, Dorico will open it. You might lose a little bit of detail in the formatting, but it's pretty good. And Music XML is also how we're going to translate to Braille, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. So when I start talking about this idea of what is going on with MuseScore.com, let's come over to MuseScore.com again and come back to Dave's comment about ratings. So it asked me to rate this score. On what basis am I rating this? I might have my own system, like, oh, it's a great score. It's Bach. It's 5 stars. How could it not be 5 stars? It's Bach, right? Some people might be rating on that basis. Some people might be rating it on the basis of, the playback. If it was done in MuseScore 1 and the playback doesn't sound so good because MuseScore 1's playback wasn't very good, they might rate it low because of that, right? Someone might be really picky, see that natural sign and maybe a couple other little weird things going on with it and say, it's only 3 stars because the attention to detail wasn't as good as it could have been, right? So there's a lot of different criteria people might use in doing that rating. And if I look at the rating on this score right now, is this telling me it's 5-star average rating? I think it is. But if I go back and look at the list of the different scores, okay, that's a 5. Oh, that's because I viewed recently. Let me type Bach Invention C in here. If I come in here, I see his version here, which for whatever reason wasn't the one that came up first when I did it before. This guy, Classic Man, does phenomenal work, but a lot of his work was in older versions. If I take a look at this version, it looks great, looks fantastic. But I go to edit in desktop, and when it opens up, we're going to see a number of things. One is that he has written out these trills, and you can see that. You can see that in the score. See the spacing of those 16th notes? See how weird that is? That is because he's got invisible notes in another voice to write out that trill so that it plays back, the way he wants it to. And in older versions of MuseScore, those invisible notes for the playback mess up the spacing. They also will show up in Music XML, perhaps. Yeah, 1.3. He did that years ago, 10 years ago, probably, in MuseScore 1.3 was when that was out. It was 2013, 2014, I think, somewhere around there that version was current. So yeah, here's all those invisible notes messing up the spacing. And so it's, yeah, it's, even though this is a great version in a lot of respects, I wouldn't want to use this because now those notes are there messing up when you try to, work with this score. You have all these invisible notes that don't need to be there. They were just there to make that trill play back a little more accurately. 1.3 wouldn't have played back that trill at all, right? So these notes aren't needed anymore. So, but yeah, it's a fantastic fantastic transcription in general, as are most of his transcriptions. And so as a result, you have this rating that says it's a 5-star score, and yet it's not one I can use. We also have these official scores, like this is from Hal Leonard, right? So Hal Leonard is the publisher. Oh, that's invention number 2, wrong invention, C minor. Here's the C major invention. So the C major invention, this is actually published by Hal Leonard or by someone and distributed by Hal Leonard. And Hal Leonard is now part of the whole Muse group. I think most of you have heard that. Maybe you, if not, you're hearing it now. Muse group, who's the consortium basically that runs MuseScore, as well as StaffPad, as well as Ultimate Guitar and Audacity. They now own Hal Leonard as of a few months ago, which is the largest sheet music publisher in the world. So more and more Hal Leonard music is going to become available on MuseScore.com, which is great for people interested in pop music and so forth. So this version is great to have, but you'll notice there is no edit on desktop button for it. And if I hit download here, it's going to say, oh, I have to do this. I have to, it won't let me download it. I have to. And I have a Pro account, but I don't have a Pro Plus account. And I need a Pro Plus account to download these publisher scores. So yeah, not so cool. So I can't use that one either, right? And so there's all these scores on MuseScore.com that are great in a lot of ways, but aren't necessarily what I want. So the type of rating system that I'm talking about doesn't really map well to MuseScore.com's rating system because people aren't rating on the same criteria. These things say they're 5 stars, but what does that really mean? Actually, the Hal Leonard one doesn't have star ratings at all. I don't know if that's because publisher ones don't get ratings or if it just hasn't been rated yet. Not sure. But so in any case, returning now to my slides. So MuseScore.com has all those scores available, but they're all of questionable quality. And not just that, but like this one here was arranged. Some of these have like different markings that people added, those slur markings. Bach didn't write in slur markings. That's all editorial additions that I don't really care about. Some of the versions in here might be like arrangements for flute and cello or whatever, right? Or they might be someone's just random adaptation of the piece. And so I don't want those either. So there's tons of stuff on MuseScore.com. And the point is, how do we weed it down, right? How do we get the good stuff? IMSLP is pretty much the good stuff. It's stuff from publishers, but it's not in MuseScore format. So it's just a PDF, not as useful as something on MuseScore.com because it's not done in MuseScore. And therefore, you can't just load it into MuseScore and edit it. So years ago, I want to say maybe 5 years, 6 years, I lose track of time, probably at least 6 years ago. Peter Jonas, who's now works for the Muse group, part of the MuseScore team, started this project called OpenScore, which is a fantastic project. It's a fantastic idea. And the idea was, it was him and some other people. He kind of took it over. The originator was other people involved also, because it kind of morphed into existence based on a couple of other previous projects that started off as someone wanting the Bach-Goldberg inventions, a good published version of the Goldberg variation, sorry, to be a good open, like free to download, a free edition of the Bach Goldberg variations, so free in PDF format. You could just download it, print it yourself. That would also be available in MuseScore format so that you could edit it yourself, and also available in Braille format so that blind musicians can read it, and then also have a recording that goes along with it. The guy who kind of started this project, Robert Douglas, his wife is a great classical pianist, and she did a recording of it. And so they did the open Goldberg variations. Then they did the open well-tempered clavier. Same idea. MuseScore free versions produced in MuseScore professionally. Like, Robert did some of the work himself, but they hired other people or got other volunteers who are good at editing scores and know how to do things right and check for accuracy and check for all this stuff. So there's the open well-tempered clavier, and then OpenScore became like the umbrella for all of these things and more. And they've now done like maybe a dozen more scores. They did like Beethoven Symphony, some Chopin piano music, some Bach keyboard music, the one of, I think, Jupiter from the planets, maybe, I forget. But like a dozen pieces, and an opera, full opera, but only a dozen pieces in like 5 or 6 years. Obviously, this isn't going to be really practical. The problem is that the process for OpenScore is very, what we would say, heavy weight. In other words, in order to get, like, you can't, like, some random person can't just say, hey, I did this score here, would you include it in OpenScore? It's this whole process, top down, of they're going to select which scores get done, and they've got an editor that needs to like edit the results, and a proofreading team, and there's this whole organization to it. And then there's all these issues of, well, which version of MuseScore should get used. Those original ones were done in MuseScore 1. Actually, Goldberg was done started before MuseScore. No, it was done using a beta of MuseScore 2. So a lot of those older versions don't even really open that well anymore. And then they started this whole thing of the OpenScore leader corpus. That was the first thing that happened. There was a university that had access to all of this music that they had started to enter into notation software for research purposes, and it sort of got morphed into the OpenScore project. And so all of these art songs, basically 19th century art songs primarily, people like Schubert, etc., Mendelssohn, all these art songs were done. And that was a somewhat lower weight process. It wasn't as many hoops to jump through to get the scores in there, but there were still a lot of scores and a lot of hoops. And now there's the OpenScore String Quartet project, which is a similar thing. They've got people, Heiss, who's a member of our community, has contributed to that. And it's people will transcribe from those PDFs on IMSLP, make this music in MuseScore format, and then there's some process of proofreading and so forth, and then it becomes available. But it's a lot of work. It's not just taking existing scores and say, hey, this one's pretty good. It's this whole top-down process. So what I'm talking about here is going to be a little more bottom-up. It's going to be a little more, hey, here are some scores that already exist or that anyone could maybe create, and we're just going to check them off as being, this one's high quality, pretty good. So, and I realize I'm just talking a lot here, but that's kind of what I need to do. So when I'm finished with this, now I'll talk about the problems to solve, and then it will open it up more for some chat here. There's two other things I need to talk about, or three actually, because Dave mentioned a wiki, which is probably smart. Sao Mai is a company in Vietnam that produces Braille technology stuff. And they have a very good Music XML to Braille converter. So once music is in MuseScore format, you can export it to Music XML and run it through their converter and get Braille files. Now, this is fantastic. And those Braille files can be uploaded to IMSLP. Right now, there's no facility in MuseScore.com to put those Braille files. But Braille files are really useful because a lot of blind users have a device that you run your fingers along the top of, and it has these little pins that pop up so that it's basically like reading Braille off of this little electronic device. And it can read these files and pop up the right pins so you can read the file that way. Or there's what are called Braille embossers. That's basically a printer that prints Braille by, punching the dots into the paper. So once you have a Braille file, you can either read it with one of those Braille readers, or you can use an embosser to actually make a paper Braille, a hard copy Braille. So the SoundMy converter is great for that. MuseScore does have a built-in Braille export, but it's not as sophisticated as you'll get better results in general exporting to music XML and then running through the converter. Someday, the plan is to take that native Braille format, native Braille export, and enhance it with the SoundMy stuff, because the SoundMy stuff is pretty much open source also. And the people who developed that worked on a Braille input system for MuseScore as well. So there's some collaboration there. Yeah, and only one person has been contributing Braille files to IMSLP. That's Haipeng Hu, right? I don't know the processes. And I don't know the licenses, because by definition, any Braille file you find is less than 100 years old, because Braille files didn't exist until recently. If you took an existing printed or embossed Braille score from 100 years ago and then just made a BRF of it, BRF is the format for Braille, you could, in theory, say that's good copyright wise and it's legal. But other than that, most Braille files were produced in the last 30 years. If you find an actual BRF file, or the last, I don't know how many exactly, but within the last few decades since that format has been a thing. So unless we know the copyright status, there's an issue with that. Now, on the IMSLP website, they have here's the descriptions of the formats they describe, and BRF is number one on the list. I'm not sure why, but it is, and that's cool. And they talk about the what it's useful for, the guidelines it should follow, and there's also a whole page here on IMSLP website on the process for contributing. And I haven't really looked into that. I've never contributed to it, but this is something we're going to need to investigate if we want to use that maybe as a place to house the Braille files. Even if we use MuseScore.com for other stuff, we might still want to house the Braille files on IMSLP and maybe upload the MuseScore files there, as well as MuseScore.com, so that we can take advantage of the playback of MuseScore.com, but also have them on IMSLP, which is maybe easier for some people to navigate. So there's two issues with MuseScore.com here. One is the whole, hey, I don't want to go into the internal marketing politics or whatever, but MuseScore.com has kind of a reputation of being kind of icky as far as trying to force people into pro accounts that they don't need, and not handling canceled trials well and stuff like that. So a lot of people are understandably gun shy about using MuseScore.com. It is totally possible to create a free account there and download public domain music with no bother, no issues whatsoever. It's totally possible, but it's also really easy to get hoodwinked into signing up for some account you don't want or need, and getting charged for it. So that's an issue. And then, since I'm talking about Braille, the accessibility of MuseScore.com is an issue as well. And I don't understand all the issues. I've seen some of the discussion, but I know that MuseScore.com overall, yes, as a blind user, you can get there with your screen reader, you can play scores, you can download them. But I know a lot of the things about how MuseScore.com works are not screen reader friendly. And so I know blind users are not able to take full advantage of MuseScore.com. Presumably that's fixable. And Peter Jonas, the person who started OpenScore or is in charge of OpenScore, is also kind of in charge of accessibility related issues relating to MuseScore. And he has some pull here. So once we really understand what's going on here, it's possible he can help direct people to fix those accessibility issues, as well as possibly make Braille a available format for download. Those are possible things that we might be able to solve. All right, let me flip back over to my slides. Finally, I just want to mention, well, Outside Shore Music, my site. I'm totally open to and volunteering to use the resources that I have available to say if anything about my site, whether it's the existing site here on Circle or if it's me creating a separate wiki and putting the Outside Shore label on it somehow and accessing it through Outside Shore Music, whatever. If there's any way that my site can be useful in this, I'm totally open to that. And I'm not saying I want to own this or do all the work myself, because this is very much a community thing that I'm going to be talking about. But anyhow, yeah, if there's any way that my branding or the resources I have made available can be useful in this, even if it's just to have discussions about it, I don't know. I'm just putting out there that that is something that exists that we might find useful. All right, so here's what there is, and a little bit about, again, what we're looking for. What we're looking for now is, imagine you were in my shoes 2 days ago and you wanted to find a version of Bach's Invention in C that you could use to learn the piece from, or to do it, not just to learn a piece from, because if it was just to learn the piece from, you could use a PDF. As a blind user, you would need a music XML or a BRF file, perhaps. But for sighted users, at least, you could totally learn it just from the PDF, right? But we want the MuseScore file so that we can also take advantage of the playback. And, if we want to then do things like, one of the exercises in the counterpoint course was to take a 2-part piece and add a 3rd part. And everyone was real skeptical of that. But man, did people do great jobs coming up with ways of adding 3rd parts to existing pieces. Well, that, having it already in MuseScore format is fantastic. If you already have it in MuseScore format, then all you got to do is click buttons to add a staff, and now you can add your third part. So, and Ella, I'm really happy to see that you're finding MuseScore.com useful. And yeah, I know it's useful. I just know there's also, a lot of low quality material, and that sifting through is the big problem here. I mean, I know what I'm doing, and I got hoodwinked. I use that term twice to mean different things, but I got myself into a situation where I thought I was working with a good transcription of that Bach invention because it looked good. And but then I discovered the typos, and okay, whatever, typos happen. I'm not faulting it too much. It's still a good transcription. It just had typos, right? But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that's just nowhere near as good as those ones I showed. Like someone only transcribed the first 6 bars and then stopped, or they did all sorts of crazy whatever. So yeah, there's all sorts of not good stuff there, and the star rating system that exists isn't very useful. So one thing that does exist, and then we're going to flip over to the problems that solve, because I keep forgetting, be kind of like what I'm talking about, but very specifically focused on Braille. In other words, the idea would be it wasn't going to be this whole around as I'm to try to show what I think is necessary to show. But yeah, I'll try to be more aware of that. So anyhow, this OpenScore Braille project was started a few years ago, more along the lines of what I'm talking about. There's all this music that exists. Let's just identify the stuff that's pretty good, and then we'll mark it as OpenScore Braille certified. So it's a great concept. Oh, is my audio having a problem? I'm hearing problems about audio. Is my audio not working anymore? Okay, well, if it's okay for some people, that says the problem's not on my end. So if you're experiencing problems, maybe just refresh or something. I don't know. The internet. It's temperamental. Okay, so yeah, the Open Score Braille project is very much along the lines of what I am talking about here, but it's very focused on Braille. But it's not like MuseScore.com has any special features for Braille. It just was meant to identify pretty good scores so that Braille users would have known good scores to download. But it's not just useful for Braille, right? It's useful for anyone. So I kind of want there to be a parallel project, Open Score Lite or Open Score Community, or I don't even know what it will be called, if it'll use the Open Score branding or what. But whatever it's going to be called, it's going to be, this is essentially it. It's a group that was created on MuseScore.com. There are discussions here, and there are scores that were posted to the group. Or I think there's a separate thing where their scores. I don't even remember how it's all organized. But yeah, there's the scores. Yeah, there's not scores for the group. There's scores that this account has posted, which already means one person is responsible for posting them. I don't like that. I'd rather it be a group or a set that anyone can add to, or at least anyone who's approved to. Anyhow, this exists. So let's come back to my slides, and I'm going to stick the chat in the middle where there's nothing, right? So here's where I really want to hear more stuff in the chat. I'm going to super quickly run down these concepts, and I just want your thoughts on any or all of them. So one problem is defining what high quality means, right? I'm talking about high quality scores, and we're talking about, accuracy of the transcription, how good it looks, and how well MuseScore was used. Those things I talked about at the beginning, not attaching things to the wrong notes and then dragging them somewhere else, etc. We'll want some guidelines. So any thoughts anyone has on how we might define that? I've given you a pretty good broad definition right there. Any guidelines that we might have? The Open Score projects have their own guidelines that talk about, how you should enter these things and how you should handle this and how you should do this. And these are good guidelines, and I'm going to explore those more, maybe come up with a set of my own. But, there'll be guidelines that say things like, if you don't use invisible notes for trills, that might be one of the guidelines, right? So, or if you must, put them on a separate staff so that they can be easily ignored. That might be a guideline there, right? So there's any number of guidelines there. So thoughts on how we might come up with good guidelines. Permissions. When I mentioned the ABRSM and the fact that they don't currently have a license agreement with MuseScore.com, so we can't post their music legally. Does someone have any in with them? Does someone have any way of contacting them to try to get some sort of permission so that at very least we can make Braille editions available? Maybe they don't want MuseScore editions available because it cuts into their profits. Although why they should be caring about profits, I don't know, but I guess they are. It's a for-profit company. But at least you would hope that they would give permission for Braille. But I don't have. I know people who know people, but maybe you people are some of those people, and so I want to hear any of your thoughts about that. Now, the idea of sourcing transcriptions, right now, MuseScore.com has tons of music. Almost anything you might want to learn that's public domain, someone has probably transcribed. But every once in a while, there's something that no one has, or no one has completed, or no one's done a version that's anywhere near the quality we would want. And so what we're probably going to look for is, some people might say, I really want a high quality version of blah, 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 and it doesn't exist right now that I can find. And then, a system by which people might be able to give an incentive to create those transcriptions. Let's talk about that. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to see this chat moving. I want to see your thoughts on anything I'm talking about. RCM, what's that, Ella? Public domain from these exam. Oh, are you talking about the ABRSM? The exam boards, yeah. The public domain, yeah. So obviously, the public domain material won't be a problem permission-wise or anything, but the non-public domain material. Interesting that solo literature for things like violin sonatas and so forth. Yeah, I agree. I found less of that than I found solo piano stuff, and so it's off. Oh, RCM is Canada. That's good to know. Okay. And Chris, yes, you're absolutely right. It's a too heavy weight of a model for the open score string quartet. That is what I want to avoid. I want to avoid making it be such a headache to. I mean, it's a great project. I don't want to denigrate the project. They produce great results, but it's not scalable the way the way I want. I want to like quickly go through tons of scores and mark things and build up this library of existing music that says, hey, this is already pretty good. And then maybe over time better ones become available and we update this, right? This is part of what I mean by version control. Is like, oh, a better version of such and such a score just became available, so let's update the information we have. Also, by version control, I mean things like, oh, that version was pretty good for MuseScore 2, but someone has MuseScore 4 version of it now. Let's make sure we have that available, and let's make sure they're both available so that if you're limited to MuseScore 2 because you've got you're running Windows XP or something, then you can still access the MuseScore 2 version. So yeah, we want to have something to handle that. So by hosting, I mean, well, do the scores live on MuseScore.com? Do they live on IMSLP? Do they live somewhere else? I think for my money, they should live on MuseScore.com so we can take advantage of the playback and all. But also having them on IMSLP makes total sense. Also, should there be some cross-linking between them? Yes. How do we manage that? I don't know. These are things that we need to be talking about. And I'm going to start a discussion about this in the community somewhere so that we can continue this discussion going forward. But yeah, this was sort of the launching of all this talking. Now, here is kind of the big crux of the matter. Who is going to be judging the quality of this? If we have 100 versions of that Bach invention in C, who goes through and says, oh, this is the good one, or these are the good ones? And how do we mark the scores to say, yeah, that's it? We already see the star system doesn't work. You could rate it 5 stars, but if everyone else is only rated at 3, it's still the average rating is only going to be 3. So the star system for rating isn't going to be useful, right? So I'm assuming that maybe we have some sort of system by which individual users who are part of this project, whatever it is, and that's the other thing, we'll have to identify, well, who's part of this project. I want it to be big. I don't want it to be like this tightly controlled small group. I want it to be crowd sourced. But I want it to be a crowd of people who understand what we're going for here and who know how to use MuseScore. And so, probably tying it to mastering MuseScore. And, I want to at some point have a mastering MuseScore certification that you've completed the course and demonstrated that you're good. And then your scores that you upload would automatically qualify, right? That's something that might happen also. Oh yeah. And that's a good point. If a random person posts something, they should agree to, because I do feel bad that I use some people's scores in my demos without asking permission. You sort of assume, well, they posted it public, they must want people to look at it. But are they really cool with people dissecting their scores? Maybe not. But then if they want their music included, by all means, they should be able to nominate it, right? So there's that question of how music gets sort of selected to even be considered. And then who is going to do the judging? And do we have a voting system? What does that look like? Do we need some other, since MuseScore.com just has that rating system, do we have to have some other system put in place where we can let people vote on scores? I don't know these things. I've just got ideas. Yeah, and and if we have those text notes, those would be great. But the other thing is, people can add comments to scores, but then we're going to have all the random comments from other people saying "cool dude" or all this other stuff, or these people post some pretty insulting things for no good reason also. And so there's all sorts of random comments to have to sift through that I don't want to have to do. So if we had the scores associated with a group on MuseScore.com, comments within that group could work, or we could use resources of Outside Shore Music for that kind of discussion, or it's all done on a wiki. So yeah, these keep brainstorming here, and we'll continue the discussion after we wrap up. So yeah, once we've kind of decided on these are the good ones, some by whatever process we have, then we somehow need to put a label on it. MuseScore.com doesn't have a system by which I could go in and say, yes, we have decided this one should get the bronze star of Mastering MuseScore approved, or whatever we're going to call it. But adding it to a special group would be one way of doing it. Also, there's sets, and either of those can be arranged where the sets are collaborative. So anyone who is approved can add scores to that set or to that group. And so within MuseScore.com, that's possible. IMSLP has their own vetting system. So you'd have to get permission first to be allowed to upload stuff to IMSLP. So yeah, the MuseScore.com process is probably simpler, but it would be great to have both happen. But it does mean someone's got to actually upload it separately. And the thing is, until it's uploaded, you can't even be commenting on it. With MuseScore.com, it can be there, and then people can be looking at it saying, is this good enough, right? So MuseScore.com is a great place to kind of host stuff while waiting to put the star on it. And then, we figure out how to label them. And maybe it's just the fact that they're included in the official group that we create. That might be the way to do it. And then we want there to be a way to then search these scores, right? So IMSLP has a fantastic search facility. Fantastic. It's good, anyhow. MuseScore.com has a decent search facility, but I don't know how it works with the group facility. So I don't know if there's a way to just search within a group. So if we have a group for the approved scores or the high quality scores, if it would be an easy way to search within that for Bach and Bench and NC, so that's another thing that we would need to figure out, if the built-in search on the website's good enough as is. Oops. There we go. So yeah, I wanted to talk through all my points so that you would know where my thinking is. What are the issues that we're dealing with? And yeah, let's keep these comments coming in chat. I will keep responding to them for the next few minutes here. And then let's take these thoughts on the road, and we'll continue the discussion in a thread in a post that I make. So yeah, Price has a couple good comments here. That Music XML is not perfect. It's good. It's a good thing to have, but you definitely want to have the original MuseScore file also, or the original Sibelius file or whatever, because that's like the single source of truth. The Music XML is think of it as like a automatically generated translation. You know how those work. They're good enough that you can understand what someone was trying to say, but it's not really it. Music XML is better than that, but it's not going to be perfect. So, but it's as good as we have for getting music from one program to another, including from MuseScore to the SoundMy converter, or from Sibelius to MuseScore, or MuseScore to Finale, etc. So it's not perfect. So yeah, we'll definitely want to always have the sources available. But right now, the Music XML, the MuseScore to Music XML to SoundMy is the best Braille automated Braille system that exists right now. That anyone, there's a real expensive product called GoodFeel that's sort of a human-assisted Braille converter system. That is the gold standard. So professional Braille transcribers will use the Goodfeel software and a lot of manual intervention. But if you're just looking for an automated system, especially a free automated system, MuseScore to MusicXML to SalMai is currently the best way to go. So that newer versions of MuseScore, that's part of my version control thing here is, yeah, I mean, like there's that great Bach Open Goldberg that was done with a beta of MuseScore 2, and it's almost useless now. So some of these scores, someone, the most popular ones, hopefully then someone takes it upon themselves to say, hey, I want to own that score and update it. Now, is that doable? Can you update someone else's score in MuseScore.com? Well, no. Like I can't, like if I take one of Classic Man's scores and say, I've updated this for MuseScore 4, I can't update his version, nor should I want to, right? His version is his version, and someone who still has MuseScore 1 might want it. But I might want to take his version, update it for MuseScore 4, get rid of those trill notes, and somehow credit him and somehow link to it and say, this is the same version. It's just been updated for MuseScore 4. So yeah, we need a process for that. These are difficult questions. And that's in large part why OpenScore hasn't, like the big original OpenScore project, not the little OpenScore string quartets. I mean, there's a handful of people who worked on the OpenScore string quartets, a handful of people who worked on the leader corpus, the OpenScore Goldberg variations, and the scores that were done there was done by like a separate team of people. It was very tightly controlled, even more so than the leader corpus or the string quartet project. What was my point about that? Oh yeah, so one of the reasons why they haven't done more of these things, like when I mentioned that Beethoven symphony that's done, or the planets, actually maybe the entire planets were done, or was it just Jupiter? I don't remember. But one of the reasons it wasn't done is they couldn't solve these problems. They realized, oh, we want to wait until MuseScore, the next version of MuseScore comes out, because it's going to have some feature that's going to make things better. And then that one comes out like, oh, but the next version is going to have some other thing that will be even better. And so they kept kind of waiting for the perfect version of MuseScore to come out before doing any more work. And there's never going to be the perfect version. There's always the next best thing coming. So they kind of painted themselves into a corner a little bit there, but now they've got all these old versions that no one's updating. And yeah, that is a problem. And so there will need to be people who are willing to continue to update things. So when I talk about people now, I haven't talked so much about people. I've talked about technologies. Obviously, all this stuff requires people to do this, and getting people to volunteer to do stuff, well, that's part of the problem with any of these OpenScore projects, is not enough volunteers, and then they get too much work. So I want this to be as low weight of a process as possible, so that volunteering costs you nothing. And maybe you get a reward for it. And here's where, again, under the auspices of Outside Shore Music, I can't give you a free MuseScore Pro account or anything like that, but I can, discount your membership on my site or whatever. And there's different ways that I would have of rewarding participation. So that's also something to be something else to consider. Yeah, you're right. It's the whole planets. Yeah, that's amazing that they did that, right? So a lot of talking from me, but yeah, it's a big topic. It's one I've been hinting at for several months that I've been interested in. And now that I've got enough of the other aspects of my life kind of falling into place with the new studio, etc., it feels like it was time to start work moving forward on this kind of thing. So what I think I'm going to do is wrap up here. And again, I will start a thread in the community somewhere where everyone has access to it. I might have to think about what makes the most sense, but I will figure that out, and then we can continue the discussion. So that all said, let's whoops, I don't want to solo the trumpet. Yeah, Okay. As always, when I start doing other things, MuseScore takes a minute to catch up with its playback. But I want to thank everyone for listening to me ramble for all this time. There was so much I wanted to get out, and I'm also hoping that now having it in recording, people can be checking it out later and posting comments on the video. And I will make sure I include a link to the thread that I start so that I can try to keep comments in one place to the extent possible. But yeah, let's take this seriously and all work together to try to make something happen, so that something comes of this other than just talk. Right? It was a lot of talk. Let's see how it can translate into some sort of action. All right. So tomorrow will be music masterclass, and we'll be looking at imitation. We'll be talking about imitative counterpoint and talking about some Bach and talking about other aspects of it, maybe doing some exercises. So hope to see you there. If not, next week, ask me anything for the MuseScore Café. Hope to see you there as well. Goodbye, all.